Chapter 23. Nicholas and Edward had become old hands at getting on trains. They hid under a bench and watched the activity in the station. Above them, letters on a big black sign flipped over showing when trains were leaving. Passengers jumped off trains and headed into the city. People arrived at the station, wheeling luggage behind them. A loudspeaker made announcements. Soon the loudspeaker blared out, "Old Colony Line, south to Plymouth, now loading, track 12. "That's us," Nicholas said. "Come on, Edward." They scurried into the line of people headed for the train. They could see a tall, skinny man with a blue uniform and a round hat helping people onto the train. "That must be the conductor," Edward said. "Follow me, Nicholas." The two animals hid behind a young woman pulling her luggage on wheels. She stopped to ask the conductor a question. Nicholas and Edward paused with her. "Yes, miss. This is the train to Plymouth." The conductor looked down at her luggage. "Let me help you with your bag," he said, picking it up. Nicholas and Edward tried to hide behind the girl's shoe. "Hey, wait a minute," the conductor said, seeing the animals. "You two can't ride the train." Nicholas and Edward took off down the platform. The train whistle blew. "Last call for the Plymouth train," the speaker announced. The conductor dodged among the boarding passengers, following Nicholas and Edward. "You two come back here! I can't let you on my train!" He bumped into a passenger. He knocked a bag out of her hand, spilling its contents on the platform. He stopped to apologize and pick up the mess. Seeing a chance to flee, Nicholas and Edward looked for an open door onto the train. The whistle blew again. The train started moving. As they ran, the train picked up speed. Nicholas finally spied an open door. "Quickly, Edward!" he hollered. Nicholas leaped, Edward leaped, and the door began to close behind them. The conductor jumped aboard and the door slid shut. The whistle blew again, and the train left the station headed south. The train clattered down the tracks through South Shore towns. It stopped to let people off and pick people up. Nicholas and Edward hid under a seat and kept an eye out for the conductor. He came through the car collecting tickets and poked holes in them with a silver tool to mark the tickets as used. Little bits of paper sifted down to where Nicholas and Edward hid. The shreds of paper tickled Nicholas's nose. He held back as long as he could. Suddenly, he sneezed so hard that he tumbled right out into the aisle, right next to the conductor's shoe. "There you are!" he shouted. "I knew I would find you!" Nicholas ran down the aisle as the train rocked down the tracks. The conductor chased Nicholas from one car to the next. Edward puffed along behind them. Nicholas was at the end of the last car when the train screeched to a halt. "Aha!" the conductor said. "I've got you trapped at last!" Suddenly, the door opened and a loudspeaker announced, "Last stop, Plymouth. Everyone off here, please." Nicholas jumped from the train. Edward ran between the conductor's legs and landed on the ground next to Nicholas. They took off into the bushes and trees at the ends of the tracks. The conductor stood on the train with his hands on his hips and a puzzled look on his face. Nicholas and Edward scurried through the bushes on a path that led to the ocean. They came to the harbor. It was late afternoon on a gray November day. They were both tired and hungry. They wanted to find some food and shelter for the night. "There it is," Edward said. He was pointing at a wooden ship floating next to a pier. It had tall masts and a maze of rigging. It was getting dark and fog flowed in from the sea. "What is that?" Nicholas asked, looking up at the ship. "Why, that's the old reproduction ship, Mayflower 2, Edward said. "She's been floating in this harbor for years and years." "I don't like the looks of it," Nicholas said. "There's something very strange about this ship." "No one seems to be around. I bet we can find some food and some place to sleep," Edward said. "What if it takes off like that fishing boat in Gloucester? Remember, Edward?" Nicholas said. Edward said, "Come on, let's climb aboard." Edward marched up the gangway. They couldn't make out much in the dark and fog. Nicholas heard the ship creak and groan softly as it rocked in the water. He wasn't so sure it was a good idea, but he followed Edward onto the old wooden ship.